Well, it's great to see some new faces out there and some new participants in this series of webinars. We, about a year ago, started a group of us to talk about how we could promote a more regular and systematic process of learning and reflection among Baha'is in the first instance, who are trying to work in the field of international development and striving to apply the Baha'i principles more effectively and challenge ourselves to do so more faithfully. And gradually we've realized that there's probably a wider community out there of people who in some way feel akin to the Baha'i teachings and are interested in development, either working professionally or studying or just intrigued and want to learn more. So we started to call on people who have interesting experiences in this field and perspectives to share. And at the same time, we started a online social media community on Facebook, which is now called Development Reflections. And we began an affiliation with ebbf also around, so quite a while, I guess May, June of last year. And so they've been helping us to set up an infrastructure for this embryonic community and giving us points and tips. So I think we want to continue because we feel that, you know, those of us who have something to share and to learn, it's really an obligation to try and do so in the most effective way that we can, and not be content with making kind of glib generalizations about what the Baha'i teachings say about international development, because there's so many treasures and very profound truths there that we're only just beginning to understand. So as for today's webinar, we're very pleased to have back with us Leslie Steward, who's the director of FUNDAEC. I think everybody is familiar with FUNDAEC. And we were able to have a webinar some months ago with Leslie and Sohail Duki from Bayan Foundation in Honduras, which is where many of these principles have taken a very nice expression. But now we're going back to the origin more with FUNDAEC and hear about how their approach evolved and the history and the current thinking and aims and objectives.
Okay, so it's a great joy and honor to be here with all of you that are working in this field of social and economic development in different parts of the world, and it's very very interesting to know about this area of learning that you're starting about the application of Baha'i principles to this field of endeavor. So my presentation will have basically two parts. So I will first make a very brief summary of the history, purpose, guiding principles and methodology that have inspired FUNDAEC's research action during this past decade. And the second part I will try to again briefly share with you some of the different programs that FUNDAEC is presently learning about. So, as you know, FUNDAEC is a Baha'i-inspired NGO that was created in the 70s and that emerged from the efforts of a group of scientists and professionals that, together with the population of Norte del Cauca in Colombia, wanted to learn about how to find a more appropriate role for science, technology, and education in the development of rural communities, and how to raise capacity within the population to define its own paths of development. So this is part of the very first groups of youth in Norte del Cauca that, along with the founders of FUNDAEC, started this path of exploring together the elements of the conceptual framework that guided FUNDAEC since the beginning. So I talked a little bit about the purpose, and now I will talk about a little bit about the guiding principles. But just for the context of so that you have more context about the creation of FUNDAEC, you know that FUNDAEC, it was created at the same time of the Ruhi Institute, and these both institutions, really what they wanted to do was to respond to the aspiration that the population in Norte del Cauca had to promote the spiritual and material well-being of their region. So FUNDAEC has been an institution that has worked very linked to the processes of the Baha'i community in Colombia, but also as a research organization in the field of development has been very connected to the work and the efforts of the government and different institutions in Colombian civil society that are trying to respond and learn about the different challenges facing social and economic development in the country. So as you know, during the time that FUNDAEC was created, it was becoming increasingly evident that development, defined mostly in terms of industrialization, was failing many of its basic objectives and was not improving the living conditions of the vast majority of the peoples of the world. So from its very inception, FUNDAEC realized that the response to this problem was really rethink some of the fundamental assumptions about the nature of development itself and about the human being who was going to bring about that much desired progress and the kind of society that he or she was expected to build. So what FUNDAEC did was to set out on the long process of systematically trying to outline the beginnings of a conceptual framework that will then evolve as it enters in the search for alternative paths of development with the people of the region it had chosen to serve. So something that was at the heart of all the thinking at the beginning was that the participation of the people in defining their own paths of progress is at the heart of our understanding of development, but that this participation can only happen through a process of capacity building where different populations participate in the application and generation of knowledge. And for development to be successful, this capacity building has to occur both at the level of the individual and at the level of the institutions of a region. Sorry? So the populations with which FUNDAEC will interact will not be perceived as masses of undernourished people overwhelmed by problems and needs. FUNDAEC considers the participants of its programs as irreplaceable resources in a self-sustaining process of change. And the challenge will be then to how to find paths of action that will help populations translate all this potential into reality and create possibilities for viable plans of development. Another point of agreement from the beginning had to do with the widespread crisis in the very conception of the nature of human beings and of society. Dominant ideologies, as you know, while praising the human being abundantly, tend to reduce him finally to an object of manipulation and insatiable pleasure-seeking consumer of goods or an untiring participant in power struggles. So FUNDAEC chose to analyze issues such as poverty and social disintegration, bearing in mind this crisis of identity, but working to develop in its programs or working to develop its programs as contribution to a far more exalted vision of the human being. And this conception of the human being, of course, it's, as you know, also intrinsically related to the understanding of reality and how do we see the world and interact with the world in order to work towards social change. So for FUNDAEC, this reality is conceived as one single whole and is influenced by both spiritual and physical forces and principles. And knowledge about this reality, as we know, has been organized throughout history into two systems of knowledge known as science and religion. So in order to learn about this reality and therefore interact with it, and then more specifically learn how to promote the well-being of people, FUNDAEC chose to use these two systems as two sources to draw upon. Of course, this demanded a careful exploration of how both science and religion can be understood, as well as the reconceptualization of a number of concepts related to these two systems. So two elements were really from the beginning were placed at the heart of development. One, the participation in people, and the second, the generation, acquisition, and application of knowledge. So FUNDAEC understood its own role as that of accompanying a population as it moved along the path of learning about development. But all these principles and these agreements from the beginning that started to become the elements of this conceptual framework that was going to evolve with time really needed or implied a methodological perspective in order to translate ideas into concrete programs and projects. So the perspective that was chosen was based on the establishment of learning processes parallel to the population's life processes, hoping that the knowledge that will be generated will create and increase those forces that are necessary to resist opposing forces of social disintegration and gradually lead to positive change. So these shifts in the underlying principles of development required in some way an innovation in pedagogical approach, capable of translating concepts into practice. So FUNDAEC started to gradually systematize the results of this research action in an educational content and a methodology for building the capacity of people, particularly the young, to become true protagonists of their own development. So some of those action research processes were around alternative production systems, around secondary production, about community organization, and around formal education. So these learning processes gave rise to different ideas about how to conceive educational processes. So one element that was agreed upon was that the purpose of education must be to help students to gain a better understanding of the reality of the world around them and train them to assist in its transformation. On the other hand, the division of knowledge in disciplines is not inherent to knowledge itself. So there was a tool that FUNDAEC used that was the concept of capacity. And capacity understood as this capacity to think, to act in a well-defined sphere of activity according to a well-defined purpose that can help young people to contribute to the well-being and progress of their communities. So the guiding question in building educational content was what are those capabilities? Understood then as the set of interrelated concepts, pieces of information, attitudes, spiritual qualities, skills, abilities that youth need to develop to contribute to the progress of their community. So in some way, FUNDAEC uses the word capability to refer not to individual skills, but rather to complex spheres of thought and action. And for practical purposes, the capabilities were broadly grouped into 5 areas. So the curriculum and the learning that was, in some way systematized in this curriculum was broadly organized into the area of scientific capabilities, mathematical capabilities, technological capabilities, language capabilities, and capabilities of service to the community. So in this curriculum, the main, or in this pedagogical approach, the main instrument will be the textbook, seen as an ongoing dialogue pursued by the student, with FUNDAEC, with the tutor, with other students, and with the community and the institutions of society. So these textbooks are more like the record of a continuous dialogue that is learning about the development of a specific region or micro-region. So these also, what started to emerge was what are some of the basic components that that a program of education for the development should have in order to put these ideas into practice. So in these four basic components, in some way, has been those elements that have shaped many of FUNDAEC's programs. So the first one, as I was always telling you, is the text. So during all these past decades, FUNDAEC has developed more than 80 educational texts, and many of which are the result of these action research processes. So in the text, theory and practice are integrated. Also, there's the harmonious fusion of knowledge systems. The abstract and concrete activities are combined. Areas of knowledge are integrated when the capability that the text tries to strengthen requires such integration. The intellectual and spiritual dimensions of the human being are fused into one. Then you have the tutor, which is an educator that it's trained by FUNDAEC's programs that usually comes from the same community and promotes deep reflection about life experiences, accompanies the students in their social action projects, and really facilitates the study process, the reflection and discussion. And then you have the group as a group where pedagogical relationships are not traditional. They are characteristic of a group of people that are working together with a common objective. And in some ways, students and tutor are confronting concrete problems, are developing a relationship that in some way opens this path to learning. And the community, that service to the community, of course, is the fundamental axis of the educational processes. And the students participate, are motivated to participate in all the educational, productive, and organizational activities of the community. And the community also provides assistance to the groups, sharing its knowledge, facilitating the use of spaces needed for the learning of the students and the different practices. So this is just to give you a very brief summary of a little bit about the history, the principles, methodology, and the basic components that have emerged out of this learning. And of course, another component, depending in the different programs that FUNDAEC it's developing, it's a participating institution that usually is an institution very well acquainted with the reality of a specific region or micro-region, that decides to adopt some of FUNDAEC's program or materials, and that we collaborate and learn together about what it means to start this learning process in a specific context. So I will briefly tell you about some of the programs that presently FUNDAEC is learning about. And as you know, I mean, during FUNDAEC has more than 40 years of existence, so many programs have ended, and the learnings of those programs have been incorporated into the educational materials. Some of those programs have continued, and some others have emerged. And really to continually to try to respond to the different challenges facing this field of endeavor in Colombia. And the programs are conceived more than really educational training or implementation of a specific program. These programs are really seen more as lines of research action that are trying with a specific population in a specific context and sphere of action, how to learn about race capacity in the population to promote the well-being of the entire community or region. So the very first program that many of you maybe know that emerged from these learning processes was the SAT program. And the content, the methodology, and the structure of what today is known as the SAT program was really the result of learning in different populations about how to build capacity for development. The SAT program was created in the early 80s as a response to the lack of quality secondary education available to youth in rural areas of the country. This is a 6-year program that consists of 3 levels, each of 2 years of duration. And when students complete this program, they receive a high school diploma that has been officially recognized by the Colombian government. But the purpose of SAT extends beyond what is traditionally called secondary education to include understanding one's role as a promoter of well-being in the family and the community, and also developing the ability to interact with life processes in order to influence them for the better. So during these past decades, over 300,000 students have participated in this program since its inception. This program has been implemented not only in Colombia, but also as we shared with the experience of Bayan, that in a close collaboration with the government of Honduras have reached many youth in rural areas of Honduras, as well as other countries like Nicaragua and Brazil and Ecuador and Guatemala. And the SAT program was recently highlighted by a study prepared by the Brookings Institute in Washington that has chosen the SAT program as one of 12 educational programs around the world that is showing how to really learn about the importance of having quality education for youth to improve learning. And then we have the Preparation for Social Action program that maybe you have heard about. It's a program that emerged from the experience of SAT, and that was created by FUNDAEC to respond to the desire of many Baha'i-inspired organizations around the world that wanted to implement SAT and that wanted to in some way use the materials and methodology of FUNDAEC in order to promote learning around development in their countries. So the difference with the SAT program is that the Preparation for Social Action program is a 2.5-year, and it's a non-formal educational program for youth between the ages of 15 and 25. And again, as the saying that is the aim of the SAT program is to empower young people to become promoters of community well-being. And this term, promoters of community well-being, what it tries to do is to describe individuals who really are engaged in efforts that improve the social and economic conditions of a particular population and that are strengthening their capabilities to do that. So at present, we have in Colombia around 1,000 participants and some 200 graduates, but this program, it's also being implemented in other regions of the world, like Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, and this is being done in close collaboration with the Office of Social and Economic Development at the Baha'i World Center. The other program is Supporting Community Leaders program. This program really arose from the pressing need in Colombia to increase youth access to higher education, vocational training, and training in trades and crafts. Even though national efforts in Colombia are underway promoting this learning, however, youth in rural and vulnerable populations don't have much access to these efforts and are not prepared to to choose appropriate career paths or navigate through academic environments. So the Supporting Community Leaders Program aims to address these challenges faced by youth in Colombia and create groups of 20 to 25 students who are accompanied during a 4-year period as they choose and pursue a career path. And the main features of this program is to include an empowering service-oriented educational content, an orientation in trades and professions, and a system for financial support, and as a very strong area of how to help them to strengthen their service to the community activities. So around 200 students are in Colombia presently in this program, and around 40 graduates at the moment. The other program is the Native Forest Restoration Project, and this one is very linked to, as you know, the emergence of the local house of worship in Norte del Cauca cluster. The idea of this native forest restoration is that really it's a dependency of the local house of worship is going to become a dependency of the house of worship. And the idea is that in collaboration with the Baha'i community, FUNDAEC is learning with the participation of the communities of Norte del Cauca in really how to establish a tropical dry native forest of 11.5 hectares and to develop the capacity of particular groups within the community to become promoters of environmental action. So the initial phase of this process has entailed identifying a baseline of existing and endangered species, carrying out studies of the land, setting up nurseries, conducting landscape design, preparing the land. And this project is also equipping groups of people with the capacities needed then to promote sustainable agriculture and the preservation of the environment in their community, because as you know, Norte del Cauca has suffered for many years by the resorts of a very large and aggressive sugarcane monoculture, which have overtaken the natural landscape and threatening both flora and fauna in the region. So the idea is that when people come and visit the local house of worship, they can also in some way understand that close relationship that that adoration and service have, that close connection. So they can come and pray to God, but they can express their desire to serve humanity in participating in the different efforts that the Native Forest Restoration Project is going to have. Then another program is the Literacy Project. This is a program that has been developed in one of the regions that FUNDAEC has worked a lot for many years with the SAT program, and it's helping SAT graduates and SAT students how to improve their capability, their language capabilities, their appreciation for reading, children literacy that really edificates their understanding about their relationship, about cooperation, about appreciating the rural communities, and also make this possibility to have access to different a good quality literature, children literature. And then we have finally the Leadership and Community Development Program. That it's a program has just it's very new in FUNDAEC, and really its purpose it comes from how to respond to some of the challenges that right now Colombia is facing with the peace dialogues that are right now being implemented. And Cali is very the city of Cali, where FUNDAEC was created, it's very close to one of the regions in Colombia where there was a very big how you say that in English, very big consequences with the armed conflict. So Cali, in some ways, the city is receiving many of the people that are coming out of the guerrilla groups or having had to being displaced from their communities. So this is really a project of how using all the learning that FUNDAEC has had over the years, how to learn them in an urban context and in the context of the neighborhoods of a city, how to begin a conversation with the different leaders and the different institutions of the neighborhood in order to develop a different consciousness about what leadership means and how leadership should be based in moral principles and should be oriented towards the service to the community. And together with leaders and these local organizations, start agriculture and health. So this was just like a very brief summary of the history and principles, methodology, and some of the presently programs that FUNDAEC is learning about. So I think I will finish there.
That's very interesting, Leslie, and it's really 40 years of very rich experience, I think, if I can count it correctly, more than 40 years. And it's hard to match that. It's really one of the gold standards I think we have for systematic learning. And we've been joined by a few special people like Nahme and Tarane. Tarane, ¿estás ahí o se fue? Tarane was there on the line. She may have lost the connection. But I think we can open it up for questions. And I don't know if everybody is aware there's a chat box that you can access on the bottom of your screen. There's an icon for chat. There's an icon also for participants where if you want, you can raise your hand at any time. There's a raise hand option. But as I said, we can just probably leave it open. Anybody who wants to speak now can go ahead. Welcome, Tarane. Tarane, would you like to add anything? Tarane is also from FUNDAEC, and she's reconnected here. Tarane Rezvani, ¿quieres hablar? ¿En inglés o español? Okay. So anyway, we can open it up for questions. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I just would like to, coming from Africa, get a quick update on how the pilots are doing for the SAT program in the African continent.
Yes. So the question is what is happening in Africa?
It was coming in English and French, and it was coming into Kenya, to Cameroon, and I'm not sure, and Zambia.
Yes, yes.
How is it going?
Yeah. So few years ago, there was a possibility to learn together with 3 Baha'i-inspired NGOs in Zambia, Uganda, and Kenya about the implementation of the PSA program. So for a period of 3 years, FUNDAEC was accompanying these organizations, and some of these organizations continue to until now to learn and develop the program and strengthen the program. And right now are also helping other institutions in Africa to start some experiences with the PSA program. So experiences are very nascent, are starting to develop and learn about, and also other countries in Asia and the Pacific also are starting. But right now, as I was telling you, until around 2010, FUNDAEC was following directly the learning with this program in Africa. But right now, It's the Office of Social and Economic Development that is following that learning. So FUNDAEC in some way makes part of a network of different institutions around the world that are learning about this program. And it's contributing more to the learning of this program, contributing from what is happening in Colombia. So through this network, what is being learned in Colombia is shared with other institutions around the world, and also received what is being learned in other countries.
The tutorial learning system is also the replacement for high school. The 6 years program is doing some pilots in Africa.
Right now, the way that the SAT in some way was adopted in Africa was more through the PSA program. So actually the PSA program at this moment is being learned more around the question of how to build capacity in youth to become promoters of community well-being. So it's not at this moment a high school program. It's not a formal educational program, but it's more in the context of a non-formal modality. And the difference with SAT is that it's only the first level of SAT, the 2.5 years, the first 2.5 years. And it's made right now, it's being learned in the context of the clusters of different Baha'i communities. And so it's more in that context that it's the learning about the PSA, the learning about the PSA program is happening. But of course, with time, if there are possibilities to recognize officially the studies that these youth are doing. So of course, there will be steps towards understanding what it implies to recognize and officially recognize this as part of secondary education for youth.
Okay.
Maybe Chris, you can help with that. In Rwanda, you can talk to the government, because I think the way it started in Colombia, I think we started like that too, isn't it, Leslie? Like informal?
Yes, it started informal, and actually it was not thought as a secondary school program. It was more thought about how to develop human resources for development. But since in Colombia at that moment there was a big gap between rural education and urban education, SAT actually started to respond to the need of really the youth having access to education in rural communities. And that's the reason why SAT expanded greatly in Colombia. So at one moment, SAT was present in some 19 provinces of Colombia, of the 32 provinces of Colombia, in collaboration with different NGOs and the government and institutions. Right now, things have improved, but still the gap is there.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome to Tahare, who's joined us from England, and I don't know, a few other people coming in and out. And I've got also with me here Chris and Safia Anderson from Rwanda. So Chris was asking the question. Safia had another follow-up question.
Thank you, Leslie. This was very interesting and eye-opening for me. And I see it as the usage of it in a global sense. I have a question. Cost for each youth. How much is it for in a community?
You mean the cost for a youth studying in the PSA program?
Yes.
Yeah, so that depends.
Do they contribute, or it's paid by your agency, or community contributes? How does it work?
Yes, depends on the context and the way that the program is developed. But usually the costs that are implied, in one hand, I mean the text, the printing of the text, because each student has to have a text, so there's a cost related to that. And usually the community and the students make an effort to pay their own text so that they can appropriate of their text and have access to the text. But usually if the youth or the community cannot contribute with the whole amount, so the institution that is there responsible of implementing the program can also look for financing for the study books, the text. Also, another cost is related to the tutor, because the tutor has to in some way dedicate like 10 to 15 hours a week to study with the group, but also to accompany their social action project. And then there are other costs related to the training of the tutor and the different activities that happen with the groups and the different projects that they establish. So depending on the place and the context and the different conditions, so there are some costs that are associated, but it's also depends on the every case.
Thank you. This is very interesting.
It's on mute.
Mute. Oh, sorry.
No, it's not on mute. Go ahead.
I see the opportunities, for example, in Afghanistan for such thing, in Rwanda for such program. I see countries that the girls are not allowed to walk long distance to school. It is an amazing program. I see the power of it in the future.
Leslie, I wonder if I can ask you, at ebbf we have these, we're spreading local activities with ebbf, and what we're really interested to do is to share the learning. So I wonder, what have you learned? Because now FUNDAEC is spread in so many different areas of the world. What have you learned about best ways in which to share learning from diverse activities happening in different parts of the world? With the idea that really you're improving the program every time, you're finding a way to share what is useful, because sharing a lot of information is as useless as not sharing any. So I wonder if you have some best practices that you may wish to share.
I think we are doing that, and FUNDAEC has done it at different levels. I mean, this is something that is very related to the same purpose of each of these programs and everything that FUNDAEC has done, because in some way learning has been at the center of everything that FUNDAEC does. So actually, for example, in the case of the SAT program, there is a system to in some way systematize what happens during the trainings of the tutors, because the tutors come when they are trained, they come every 3 months to have training of the text that they're going to teach, but they come also to share what happened in teaching those texts and what happened in the community and the relationship with the institutions of the community and the family. So that knowledge in some way is systematized in these gatherings and these trainings. And over the years, for instance, this has helped FUNDAEC to improve the training of tutors in the different programs, especially as I was telling you in the case of SAT, but also, for example, in 2000, FUNDAEC started a process of revising all its educational content, and especially the first level of the SAT program. And with this learning was able to really incorporate many of the learnings into the educational material, and in order to share that with more and more institutions and tutors, and to learn how to make more evident certain elements of the conceptual framework, and also universalize the experience, because at the beginning the experience was very, as I told you at the beginning, was very local, was very the experience of Norte del Cauca and how it learned together to in some way learn about how to raise capacity in young people to promote development. So this was happened very locally, but then with this experience, then FUNDAEC was able to in some way universalize the materials and the content, and use certain concepts so that these materials can be used in different parts of the world. So now that these materials are used in different parts of the world, so regularly what we do is that we hold meetings with these Baha'i-inspired NGOs to share what each organization is learning, but also FUNDAEC itself from time to time write certain documents to in some way describe the different elements that we're learning about with, for example, the preparation for social action program or the SAT program. So just to give you examples, but this happens at different levels and in the context of different programs, and also in the context of the institution and the collaboration with other institutions. I hope that answers a bit the question.
Thank you very much.
Leslie, a question. Is there a component in what you have that you would call entrepreneurship training? And do you have something written on it?
Yes, actually, as I was describing at the beginning, many of them, I mean, one of the life processes that was learned about and learning was generated about, it was along production and secondary production in the context of rural communities, but also about collaboration in how to work in small groups to produce or to commercialize goods. And so there are materials that were specifically written, for example, in the SAT program, that in some way describes and shares with others the knowledge that was generated around, for example, different systems that emerged from understanding how to produce with high efficiency and diversity in small plots of land. So actually there are components of the text that in some way relate to entrepreneurship and how to really understand a productive process and what it implies and the different skills, abilities, also attitudes and spiritual qualities that are needed in order to learn from, for example, small productive projects.
And where is that? In what document is it captured?
It has been captured in the same educational materials for the youth. Of course, there are documents that systematize the learning with FUNDAEC in this research of the different life processes. But really, if you want to see like where is the systematization of this learning related to this field, you can go into the educational materials.
And that's on your website?
Sorry?
That information is on the website?
That not really the educational material are not put in a website, but there's a system to provide the study materials for people that are interested in learning about them.
Okay, so we could later ask you probably for some information and some details on that, because entrepreneurship is training is one of the things that ebbf is interested in.
Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you.
I have a more general question following on from that. We know that in the Baha'i faith, work is a spiritual obligation, and society should help every individual to find a way to use their skills and talents. And working with young people as you do for so long, have you explored the kinds of new processes that might be done in a Baha'i context to help each person to find their own, might say, career path, their own form of employment or form of service to the community in which they can live in their life, going beyond the traditional idea of employment and careers into really saying, how do you help each person fulfill their potential? So have you had any experience in exploring that with the diversity of young people you've worked with that might become more general guidance to Baha'i communities that are trying to help everybody in their community to find their way forward in life?
Yes, right now we're doing that through the Supporting Community Leaders program, which is a program that helps youth that are finishing high school and that are starting to make decisions about their career path and what is the trade or profession that they're going to pursue in order to promote the well-being of the region and community. So what we're doing is to understand how to, in some way, help students understand better what are their talents and their interests, but also to understand the reality of the place where they live and the reality of the region, the different processes and the different forces that are at place, and to identify in which of these processes each region needs people to develop certain areas of knowledge and certain careers that are needed in order to promote the development of that region. And also take into account the reality of their families, their financial resources, and the different resources that exist also in the government and in the different institutions of society that can help them advance in a specific career or trade. So this is something very new that FUNDAEC is learning, because it's based on a learning that was developed by, FUNDAEC in the late 80s developed the Fundación Centro Universitario de Bienestar Rural, which is a university center for rural well-being. That the idea was to help the tutors that were helping with the SAT program, to expand the SAT program, to help them to have a professional degree, because many of them were leaders of the community that have just finished high school and they were rendering this service to the community, and the government asked them to really professionalize and have a career in education. So the university center was created to respond to that need, and also created other careers in the, for example, the administration of local economies, and also some other programs at the postgraduate level. But then because of different circumstances, we couldn't continue with these formal programs, but then we saw this space to learn about how to familiarize youth with the diversity of trades and professions that a region needs in order to be prosperous. So right now, actually, in the context of that specific program, we're continuing to learn about this area.
Thank you. That's extremely useful. And I hope that as you acquire your learning, you will in the same way begin to capture it, because I'm sure as Baha'i communities grow, even say local spiritual assemblies will face the challenge of saying, how can they help the youth in their community to find their way forward in life to fulfill Baha'u'llah's concept of work as service. And so I think you're probably at the cutting edge of trying to figure out all the different elements of what would be involved in that kind of consultative process and process of helping people fulfill their potential. Thank you very much.
Yes, and it's really something that it's starting, but what we're trying to learn are from like specific 4 components that have now emerged. One is related on how to orient youth in trades and professions. The other one is an element of complementary education, where youth come during the semester of studies in the different institutions. They come for seminars of 3 to 4 days to in some way understand why, what is the purpose of education, how they relate education to service to the community, what prosperity implies, and what making decisions that are coherent with the spiritual and material dimensions of human life, how, in what context they can be made. So all these questions that youth have are being explored in these seminars. And then we have this component of solidarity fund to help them, because many of the challenges also come with not having enough material resources to access these training. So there's a solidarity fund that different individuals and different institutions can contribute, but the youth themselves can see with time and when they get jobs, how they can continue to contribute to the solidarity fund in order to help other youth in their region. And then the other component is really service to the community, how to help them to really have their basic activities, to strengthen their basic activities. And this is done in collaboration with the Ruhi Institute. But again, how they can develop acts of service that gradually are respond or are related to what they're learning also in university. So this is something that it's starting, and hopefully we will learn more with time.
Thank you, that's wonderful.
I think we'll proceed. Tahereh has raised her hand to make a comment or question. So, and then anybody else who wants to add a question, I don't know if you're familiar with the feature here on the window of the participants, but there's a place where you can indicate that you raise your hand to speak. So go ahead, Tahereh, and then anybody else who wants. I see also people are just unmuting. That's a way of indicating they want to speak afterwards, but go ahead, Tahereh.
Thank you, Darren John. Thanks very much for your wonderful presentation. One question that I have is, do you have any material on inspiring young people to reimagine and experiment with new institutions?
In what context? Experiment with institutions in what context?
Well, one of the things that's happening around the world, in particular in the MENA region, in the Middle East and North African countries, with the second coming of the Arab Spring that we've experienced over the past 6 or 7 years, and of course what's happening in Iran and what's unfolding now between Iran and a number of countries in the region. Institutions, age-old institutions, are being completely undermined. And what you're describing in terms of, understanding acts of service, engaging in community service, engaging in social action, is in a way redefining political participation. In other words, civic participation is moving towards the Baha'i definition that Baha'u'llah has set before us. As part of that process, we need to begin to create new institutions that can respond to needs of humanity. And one of the lines of inquiry that I've been involved with in my area of work, and my work is totally focused on human rights and education and touching on development in a way, just through the Sustainable Development Goal number 4 more than anything else, which is focused on education. One thing that the experts that I deal with constantly ask is, how do we come up with new ideas of institutions that can actually respond to people's needs? And so that's an area of inquiry that I'm very much interested in, and I wanted to see if this vast and rich area of experience that you've been involved with, have you come up with anything that you could say, this is a training that you can offer to young people that would enable them to actually come up with the components that are necessary to create new institutions? Is there anything of that sort that you have come across?
Yes, actually, that's at the very heart of the educational materials that FUNDAEC has developed, because there is this, there's this principle that is reflected in the materials that really, when you talk about participation of people in processes of development, you have to reach both. In order for this participation to happen, you have to really work at the level of the capacity of the individual, but simultaneously at the level of the strengthening or the developing of the structure, right? So in some way, these SAT groups, for instance, when they start in a community, they start to become like this new structure in the community that starts to relate to different institutions and different leaders in the community that are also trying to understand and work towards the development of their community. So actually the SAT group or the PSA group becomes like this structure that is learning about how young people can promote the well-being of their communities. And since the very beginning, the youth in the materials are motivated to engage in conversations with the different institutions of their communities, the different leaders, because development is something that has to happen at those levels, and that cannot happen if there's not this conversation between the different institutions, and also to consult about what are new structures that need to be established in order to learn about development in a more integral way. So actually, this is at the, as you're saying, it's a very important element of any initiative of social and economic development. And yes, it's immersed in the whole content of the materials.
So if I understood you correctly, you're saying it was mentioned in the Preparation for Social Action, the book that has the blue cover. Is that the one that you refer to?
Preparation for Social Action, it's comprised of 15 texts.
Okay, okay, so I've only seen one booklet. Sorry about that. So that's my limited understanding.
No worries. And along these decades, FUNDAEC has developed more than 80 textbooks. So along those texts and that content, that element is present.
But if out of all the 80, you wanted to pick one or two, because I actually want to go and start to experiment with this, which one would you say? The 15 books on preparation for social action?
Yes, and especially those related to service to the community, to the area of developing capabilities to serve the community. Maybe that's an interesting material to look for, specifically that question. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
So I think we're going to formally end this in terms of the recording of the event. It's very late in Geneva and points in Europe. So those who need to leave now, please feel free. Thank you so much for participating. And for anybody else who wants to continue to talk, I think we can do so for a while. There's, I believe Nagme had a question. Safia had a question. I'm not sure if, Tahara, you got all the information you required, but we'll continue. Thank you so much to Daniel Turan, the director of ebbf, for helping us get this space working and for staying up so late. And Daniel, one last word from you.
No, just not from me, from Leslie. Congratulations, fantastic work. You're really inspiring a lot of us. I look forward to continue the conversation to allow more of your learning to actually be spread around the world. Fantastic work. Thank you for sharing.